happens in the reverse.
All right, live.
All right, what's good, Knicks Nation? Welcome back for another Game of the Week preview. Of course, we got to preview Game 6 of the New York Knicks facing the Indiana Pacers, but now we're going back from Madison Square Garden over to Indiana, going to go see if the Knicks can close this thing out or the Pacers going to play evil villain and push us to Game 7. And who better to help me break down this game none other than my friend over here, Caitlin Cooper, the founder of Basketball She Wrote. I had to think for a second, Caitlin, because we were just talking about Caitlin Clark, Caitlin Cooper. I got to make sure I'm on the right Caitlin path today. But we got Caitlin Cooper here with us today. So make sure to hit that thumbs up button for the squad. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. And make sure to support our sponsor, UnderDog Fantasy. Use that promo code KFTV to get up to $250 now on your first deposit. All right. Caitlin, how you doing today? You got the Fever shirt going on? You got me in a groove or something. What's happening?
Yeah, I got to catch the very end of the Fever game against the New York Liberty. Hopefully that doesn't pretend the same outcome for the Pacers in Game 6 is what I just watched happen to the Indiana Fever. So we'll have to wait and see.
All right. And a shout out to TM, the Chief Modern Operation. He says Caitlin's are taking over the state of Indiana right now, which has to be true. But I got to get your opinion first on what did you think of Game 5 after seeing what happened in Game 4?
Crazy, right? It's almost like we saw two different versions of both teams in two different games. And without fully knowing, like, I know you guys probably can understand the quirks and nuances of Jalen Brunson's game better than me. By my eye, I don't think he had the same level of lift after Game 2 and the injury. Certainly looked better in Game 5, which was obviously the biggest adjustment for the New York Knicks. But also both teams did make subtle adjustments. The Pacers in Game 4 because Precious Achiuwa still in the starting lineup, not only I keep making the point that it's never been Aaron Nesmith just guarding Jalen Brunson as primary. It's been the Pacers using Pascal Siakam predominantly to help off of Precious Achiuwa. Flood strong side. It's never been one person for the Pacers stopping Jalen Brunson, and no individual player for the Pacers is going to stop Jalen Brunson. They don't have that caliber of a defender. Not many teams do. Then in Game 5, the Knicks make the adjustment to be like, look, that spacing's impacting us. Let's start Deuce McBride. And I felt like a lot of times I like to say that there's not two separate ends of the floor. There's only one end of the floor. And with Deuce McBride being out there and screening Tyrese Halliburton into the action so much, they guarded Tyrese Halliburton by forcing him to guard. And that was really my biggest takeaway from Game 5.
Yeah, watching Game 5, obviously the biggest change was just Jalen Brunson looking like Jalen Brunson.
Right.
But I asked for that when it came to who should be in the starting rotation versus Deuce McBride or Precious after OG went down. And I said for McBride, because we saw that success with the Knicks when they played Golden State this season, and even for a longer stretch of that, and really need that spacing. And also for me, it's just we need a backup big since we don't have Mitchell Robinson, and Precious has shown that he can do that as a backup big for this team. And Jericho Sims has just been up and down this season where one, kudo for Tom Thibodeau for believing in his guy, but Precious much more sound on the defensive end and understanding the rotations of where he needs to be over Jericho Sims at this point. And it's just a learning curve. Obviously, it's veteran savviness at this point. Precious also has just been on one this season for the Knicks. So that's really what I wanted to see. I'm glad that Tibbs went to that. And we're going to talk about Game 6 in a minute, but I don't see him going away from that. From the Indiana perspective, I just need to get your entire take on the entire series so far because, it's just changed dramatically where you've had OG to start the first two games. He goes down Game 2. Brunson's dealing with a lingering foot injury. Now he seems like he's fine in Game 5. From a Pacers fan and an analyst perspective, what have you seen from the series so far from the Pacers? Like, what's been their strengths? What's been their weaknesses? Like, Halliburton's been up and down. Give us your take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main adjustments that you can see is Andrew Nembhard is the most impactful defender for the Pacers, but I said it many times before the series even started. No player in the NBA gave Andrew Nembhard more trouble during the regular season than Jalen Brunson, and that manifested pretty quickly in games 1 and 2. Obviously, they make the adjustment to go to Aaron Nesmith just for the sake that when there is a contest, Aaron does have more length than what Andrew Nembhard has. And then because of what I just mentioned, they go to Game 4. They're able to help and show a lot more body strong side every time. And then now they're having to face a new reality of, did they overcorrect too much because Tom Thibodeau put Deuce McBride in the lineup? Do they need to react that much? what is their counter going to be to what they just saw? And as with regard to Tyrese, obviously he's had two games, being games 1 and game 5, where he wasn't as involved, but I think that that was for two very different reasons. I felt like after game 1, because of what I just said with you guys and likely knowing like, hey, this is areas where we can tell that Jalen Brunson just isn't himself. There's areas that I can tell with Tyrese when he just isn't himself. And in game 1, he's been listed as, questionable with back spasms for quite some time now. And there were moments in game 1 where he's being screened into the action, and as a 6'5" guard, he's in drop coverage. That's not something the Pacers would ever do unless he's not moving fully himself to be able to get out and above the level of the screen. And game 5, the difference being is the Knicks, in case people don't know the numbers, they screened him into action 22 times. That's more than the Milwaukee Bucks did in the entire 6-game series that the Pacers played against them. That's more than the Knicks had done in the prior 4 games against them, just in one. So him having to do that much show and recover, I think really did impact his offense at the other end of the floor and what his approach was on offense at the other end of the floor. And as you said, I expect that Deuce will still be in the starting lineup for the Knicks, and I expect that they're going to hunt Tyrese Haliburton equally as much in game 6 as what they just did in game 5.
And that's the strength of Deuce, right? Is that he's an aggressive defender, unlike Dante, who can be aggressive. Dante makes his impact more as an off-ball defender than anything else. On ball, that's Deuce McBride's butter and bread and butter. It's just that's where he likes it. That's where he thrives. He's the same type of guy where it's like Neesmith, right? Who he's a better on-ball defender than Nebhard, where that's the switch that they did for Brunson, right? And I think moving forward, I want to see how Tyrese just adjusts to that because look, it's the battle between the 2 point guards in this matchup. So, you can only hold good players down for so long until they figure it out and learn how to adjust. I guess what would you expect for Tyrese to do with McBride going on him, like be guarding him in the upcoming series?
Right. So Tyrese actually was hunted more in game 5 than he ran the pick and roll in game 5. So he only had 15 picks for that entire game. So during the regular season, he averaged 50 picks per 100 possessions. In this game, it was 23 picks per 100. I like Andrew Nembhard as a player a lot. He cannot be in the second year running that much of the offense for the Indiana Pacers. So to me, it's one of two things. You either go into it, and there were times where Deuce is face guarding Tyrese. He's picking him up 94 feet. Even when Tyrese got off the ball, Deuce was very aggressive to still be face guarding him and denying him the pass back. If that happens and you're content to play 4-on-4, because quite honestly, 4-on-4 is an easier version of basketball to play, it's one fewer help defender, then the ball needs to get funneled to Pascal Siakam more often when they're playing 4-on-4. There was a very egregious possession very early on in the third quarter where Tyrese is standing near the logo. They're going to play 4-on-4, and it's Andrew, throwing it into Miles Turner at the block against Josh Hart. Miles loses the ball. I don't think that's an advantageous situation for you if you need to play in isolation. Pascal was a top 10 player in isolation this year. More of it needs to be fed that way. Otherwise, you have to find means where Tyrese just can't let the Knicks dictate the offense, the terms of the offense to him this much. He's an all NBA caliber player. He's an all-star at a certain point in time, even if you are being pressured up the floor. Jalen Brunson's being pressured up the floor as well. Jalen Brunson's still going and getting to his spots and finding his shots. Tyrese needs to come with a similar approach to that. And I do think that the Pacers, in some respects, some of this comes from after they let go of Buddy Hield, Tyrese did become the most effective movement shooter in the starting lineup. They run a lot of movement shooter actions. The main thing he does if he is getting face guarded is they use him as the stack screener. He'll go down and set a stack screen, leak out to the opposite side, but that means Nemhard's being the ball handler. Nemhard's running the pick and roll, which I think is okay in smaller doses. Again, one other thing I'd like to see, they only did it once in the entirety of game 3. If Tyrese is going to be denied by Deuce McBride and guarded by Deuce McBride, have him set an inverted screen for Pascal Siakam. That happened once. Pascal's going to have a size mismatch on either side of that. If the Knicks switch it, he's getting Deuce McBride in the post. If they don't, he still has Josh Hart in the post. I just didn't feel like enough of it was quite tilted towards him as where they needed it to be.
And speaking about Pascal Siakam, he's kind of it's so fascinating when it gets to this point of the season and the playoffs, and you start to see the overflow of fan bases going into your mentions and your retweets and stuff of that nature. And then next thing you know, I'm following so many different Pacers content creators at this point. So now I get to see what everyone's talking about, and it just seems like Pacers Nation is up and down with Siakam and what they expect out of him and who he should be and what he actually is. What is it with Siakam in this series that you want to see from him?
I mean, I think one of the misconceptions is, and I've seen a lot of this getting thrown around as to why isn't Pascal guarding Jalen Brunson. if you watch the Pacers during the back end of the season after he got traded here, there was a time in Pascal's career where the Raptors could throw him against point guards and that would have been effective, and he's good and contained. For the Pacers, he's struggled with the screen navigation over the top of picks. So the idea that he's going to impact Jalen Brunson with his length once a pick comes isn't very likely, especially because the Pacers don't want to switch Miles Turner out to the ball. And if they were to switch Miles Turner out to the ball on a pick, they're going to be even more vulnerable on the glass than the game where they just gave up 20 offensive rebounds. So that's not something that they actively want to do. For Pascal, I do think like when they are hunting Tyrese Halliburton to the degree that they are, I think there's spots where Pascal probably could be more selective and be like, hey, this is an opportunity for me to pre-switch Tyrese out of that action. I'm going to, when the screener approaches, I'm going to hop up there. And he can hang in a late switch situation. Like if he switches out to the ball from the screener, he's okay and contained, but the idea that he could be Brunson's primary, I think, is somewhat of a fallacy that people have kind of thrown around out there. As to his offensive game, certainly he's had moments in the playoffs. First two games against the Milwaukee Bucks, very standout with Brook Lopez being cross-matched onto him. That's not an option that the Pacers had in the past. I think some of it can be a disconnect at times between Rick Carlisle runs an offense that's very flow-based, that's run through the guards, and they don't run a lot of post-centric actions for Pascal Siakam. They like the idea that he gets those mismatches organically through what they've already done. And certain games like Game 5, when Tyrese is being schemed out of the offense, though, I think that there are times where you need to have those post-centric sets and being like, look, we're going to take as much advantage as we can against the size mismatches that Pascal has, or we're going to generate size mismatches for Pascal.
Yeah, and look, I think for Siakam, right, I think part of it's also tough, like where you get traded to a team and now you got to make that presence even shown. I think just from like a player's perspective, like he's doing the best that he can, but he has definitely been impactful. Like this, like from a rebounding perspective, is it? I guess it's more like, is Turner the actual guy that you want next to him, or do you want somebody that's a little more imposing so that way Siakam could be a little more creative and that way he doesn't have to be that secondary rebounder in a sense? Like, I guess those are questions for the offseason, but maybe you have an idea like right now, like, is that what needs to happen?
There's games even in this series where they've won the rebounding battle. I mean, I felt like Pascal in Game 4 was very active doing chest to chest box outs. He wasn't necessarily always grabbing the rebound, but his teammates were in part because of the work that he was putting in on the glass. It's just inexcusable for the Pacers to come into Madison Square Garden and off the tip and first quarter there's a missed free throw and they gave up an offensive rebound off a missed free throw. Like that type of stuff, like there's not a lot of analysis for someone like me to do on that other than just like the number one thing on the whiteboard needs to be play better. Like literally, like if you're the coaching staff, you saw some of the stuff that Rick Carlisle said throughout two F-bombs today. Like we just need to do it. Like that's literally what some of it was.
Salute to Knicks Nation. Thank you all for tuning in for another game of the week preview. We are previewing the New York Knicks and the Indiana Pacers, getting ready to face off tomorrow for Game 6 as the Knicks are heading out, if they're not already there, in Indiana. With me on the other side is Caitlin Cooper. She is the founder of Basketball She Wrote, so go make sure to give her a follow and make sure to go check out her work. Also, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for the squad. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and make sure to support our sponsor, UnderDog Fantasy. Use that promo code KFTV to get up to $250 on your first deposit. Let me tell you something about UnderDog Fantasy right now while we're here. I love it. It's been a lot of fun, especially when you're watching these games, just because, look, we watch a lot of basketball. I like to think that I know a little bit more than the average person, but hey, what do you know? So anyway, I like to put down a little money, like $5, $10 and so forth. And the cool thing is when you do the pick'ems, you get to choose 2 to 5 players. It doesn't have to be all from basketball. It could be anybody from any sport whatsoever. It could be baseball, hockey. I mean, shout out to everyone going crazy in the chat right now. The Rangers won. So you could choose anyone up to 2, anywhere between 2 to 5 players from any different sport for your ticket. And all you got to do is just put down a little bit of however much you want to put down monetarily. And what can you do? You can also choose the insured route if you don't believe all 5 will hit. So that's what I like to do. So make sure to go check out UnderDog Fantasy. And then if you don't want to do that and you want to do some drafts, get some, put some money down, see if you can win some lunch money with your friends. They do offer a draft aspect as well. So make sure to go support our sponsor, UnderDog Fantasy. Use that promo code KFTV to get $250 on your first deposit. All right. Yeah, TM, we'll talk to CP and see about if we can bring the draft back. All right, we'll check. Salute to all the franchise channel members as well. Flizzy Flex, I see you in here. Jack City, I see you in here as well. And Kevin Marengo, shout out to you as well. So Caitlin, getting back to it though. Now we're on to game 6. What do you expect for the Indiana Pacers to do adjustments wise to make sure that they could try to push us to a game 7?
Well, it's going to sound simplistic, but number one is what I had mentioned before. If you got to play the Tyrese situation one of two ways. If you're thinking that him being hunted this much is draining some of what he does offensively, and you need to play 4-on-4 more, then it needs to get tilted more to set Pascal. You need to be more effective getting the ball to him and those types of situations. As for defensively against what they do against Jalen Brunson, I'm not sure there's necessarily a clear-cut answer there other than doing what they're already doing better, because I don't really think you can toy with the matchups that much, aside from maybe you could maybe move Tyrese off of Deuce McBride and put him onto Josh Hart, simply because Josh Hart's, if the game plan is to hunt Tyrese, they're still going to use whoever Tyrese is guarding as the screener. The difference being is Josh Hart isn't going to leak out to space to the 3-point line as the screener. He's going to move more toward the basket and be catching the ball in those situations. And something that the Pacers have done as an adjustment against that is when Tyrese goes to recover to the screener, he doesn't recover to the screener. So the low man will switch on to the screener and he peels off to the 45. That's an easier rotation if the person is moving toward the basket than if they're popping out to 3 like Deuce McBride is more frequently doing. So if you adjust that matchup, though, then you're losing Pascal Siakam's passive size around the rim, which is something that helped them in game 4. So it really is a little bit of a troublesome, tricky matchup, because I don't think they need to go back to Tyrese guarding Dante DiVincenzo. That did not go well when Dante almost burned down every cornfield in Indiana in game 3, despite the fact that the Pacers still won. So there's those components. Obviously, you could switch Tyrese out. I don't think that that's something that I would be willing to risk or chance by just putting him on to Jalen, because I did have one person in basketball reach out to me and be like, would they just assign Tyrese to Jalen at the get-go and then just be better with their help rotations and shrink the floor behind him? And you could probably speak to this, because I feel like that's something that the Cavs tried against Jalen Brunson in the first round last year, where they just outright put Darius Garland onto Jalen Brunson as a quote-unquote pre-switch, and we're like, hey, when the screener comes, then we can switch Darius Garland off of Jalen Brunson. And Jalen Brunson was like, well, I'm just not going to bring a screen then, and I'm just going to cook you in isolation. So like, I don't really think that that's necessarily something you want to look at either. Me personally, they're not going to do it because the Pacers only played 10 possessions of zone all year. But I really would have liked them in game 6 to throw out a 2-3 zone, because the Knicks ranked 26th in zone efficiency during the regular season. I realize they have active cutters both in Josh Hart and in Dante DiVincenzo, but I would have put Pascal and Aaron at the top of the zone, put as much length as possible there. So it's mitigating what I had just mentioned about Pascal and the screen navigation issues. And I would have put Tyrese in the corner. Obviously, this isn't going to help you in your rebounding department, but again, they just gave up 20 offensive rebounds to the Knicks, and they were playing man. So at least Tyrese isn't going to get hunted in a zone. He's not going to have to guard as many screening actions in a zone. So that's something to consider. And then an adjustment that I liked from the Knicks that the Pacers could probably be like, hey, is the Knicks set much harder contact screens in game 5. Like Isaiah Hartenstein was definitely making contact, and that was another thing that helped Jalen Brunson get going. The Pacers don't set a lot of contact screens. Typically, they prefer to, blur out to the perimeter or slip with their big slipping out. But in terms of getting Deuce McBride off of Tyrese Halliburton, I think setting hit and hold screens would be something that would help Tyrese. And then Tyrese, just watching the film, my co-host Samson Folk made a very good point that Tyrese, when he attacks the basket, is somebody who really benefits off of his long strides and how much ground he can cover. But when he does that, he uses a very low gather. Well, a low gather against somebody who's smaller than you and is being as pesky as Deuce isn't as an effective of a move to get to the basket. So it's more about Tyrese playing big as a 6'5" guard and how he needs to attack Deuce to be able to get downhill in those situations. So I think just little tweaks like that can help Tyrese get going. So those are kind of the things that I would mainly be thinking about.
And I gotta give you some big ups right now, Caitlin, because we got Terra One, first of all, in the chat saying Caitlin's better than Draymond Green. I don't know if you know this, but CP had Draymond Green booked today for 3 p.m. to join the show. And then 20 minutes before the show, Draymond Green decides to back out. So he gets to join a short list right now between him and Keith Pompey, who are running from the smoke when it comes to KFTV. So, hey, both those guys, if you want to create a Mount Rushmore, anybody else want to do that, you already know you're on a good list so far to be with Draymond Green and Keith Pompey. But also shout out to Paulo Hendricks for the $10 super chat. He says, salute Alex and Caitlin. Caitlin is one of the best at breaking down the game, so I can understand it better per hand emoji. So then we also got a $10 super chat from Chuck D says, salute. Alex and Caitlin, thank you for being a solid sport and trooper. Many new fans still don't understand the 30 on the Pacer jersey is one of my all-time favorites. George McGinnis, Mr. Indiana, RIP. Shout out to Chuck, shout out to Kyle Hendricks, shout out to everybody. So let's get back to it though. Anyway, I hear you on all those adjustments, and it makes sense for like, I guess it's funny that you bring up the zone, especially considering that at one it's just eye test alone says Knicks cannot handle a zone. But I feel like there's only a few teams that I get to see that. It's either Nick Nurse and the Philadelphia 76ers or Miami and the Miami Heat with Eric Spoelstra. So that's something that I understand why you would see it. It would definitely hamper the Knicks, but I still think even if they did that, and you mentioned the rebounding, that's just where it comes down to for the Knicks winning all these playoff games. And I've been saying it
Yep.
since round one is that if the Knicks win the glass, that's even by just getting 2 extra boards, they usually come out as victorious because just getting second chance opportunities is different. And that's what the Pacers did in game 4 is that they just out Knicks the Knicks, as my guy Tony said. So, last game, Knicks got back on track. They got 27 second chance opportunity points to the Pacers 9. Obviously, we know 53 rebounds to 29 just demolished the Pacers when it came to cleaning the glass. So for the Knicks, as long as they can do that, there's not really much more of an adjustment. You just gotta keep rolling with what worked from game 5, losing tracks of games. That's how much content
Yep.
we've been putting out. I'm just losing track of games at this point. But for the Knicks, like there's not gonna be much of an adjustment that outside of just trying to make sure that you force Halliburton and not dictate the offense, because once he gets to going where he wants to go, it's just then he starts spraying it out to everybody on the perimeter, and then it's just other players just cutting and just driving in and just getting easy looks. And that's the one thing that I could say I've seen from the Knicks when the Pacers did have success is just the exhaustion on having to constantly recover and get out to the 3. And then if you're chasing out, then it just gives the guy on the perimeter a chance to just drive and attack and get past the person who's trying to recover and get out there. It's just that you saw was the toll on and why we saw such an outburst from the Pacers. I knew it was going to happen. I just knew it. That the Pacers are just too prolific in offense for them not to just go bonanzas like that. So they did, but I think for the Knicks, if they could just make sure they can keep Halliburton at bay, even if it's with Josh Hart just trying to guard Siakam, or just figuring out a way where you can just give Hart some help to protect the paint. That's something that the Knicks are just going to constantly do, but it just comes down to the rebounding battle at the
And
end of the
it
day.
and it does even more so because the rebounding battle wasn't just about getting second chances for the Knicks. It was about limiting the Pacers in transition, right? Because when you're attacking the glass very heavily, it's much harder for the Pacers to be leaking out. So the Chicago Bulls during the regular season ranked 30th in transition frequency at 12.7%. In game 5, the Pacers'
Mm.
transition frequency was 11.4. So they were slower than the slowest team in the NBA when the Knicks were attacking the glass that hard. So also, it's harder for Deuce McBride to be pressuring Tyrese Halliburton 94 feet if the Pacers are securing a rebound and they're playing their flow game and pressing off of collecting a defensive rebound versus him having to do it off of a make. So the rebounding battle has been, paramount in all of these games, and certainly that looms large. And in part, that's why if the Pacers were to have won this series with the Knicks fully healthy, it would have been an upset because this was a bad matchup for the Pacers for that exact reason. They don't have a clear-cut person that they can throw at Jalen Brunson, and they're also ranked 26th in opponent offensive rebounding rate. And if you throw 2 defenders at Jalen Brunson, it outnumbers you on the glass. So, that was always going to be a challenge when the Pacers were headed into this.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just the physicality as well has just changed. I guess I want to get your opinion on that. Seeing that the little chippiness in the last game between Turner and
Yeah.
Dante, like, what did you make of all of that happening? And Dante's comments on, trying to act fake tough.
Oh, I actually didn't see that comment. What did he say?
Oh, he was essentially saying that the Pacers were acting out of character where you have Turner just trying to puff out his chest and I just get after him. And I forget, the only one I could say that doesn't change out of character who's tough is McConnell, because McConnell's just been a pest, especially when it comes to the Knicks. It's just like, previewing this game, I was as soon as I saw McConnell, I'm like, this guy is just going to have some games against us. I'm going to be very aggravated because every single time, even when he was on the 76ers, I'm like, why? How? Why is it that you have to be that pest against the Knicks? But that's essentially what Dante said, though, that
Right.
Don't get out of character.
I think it's more so, anytime in a playoff series when teams play each other this much, they're bound to get under each other's skin at some point. Obviously, it was a frustrating game for the Pacers. That might have just been frustration with the game leaking out on both sides. Lots of words have been said about officiating and who's being more physical with who. I feel like after every game, one fan base or the others, like
All the time.
Aaron Neesmith's body and Jalen Brunson the whole way of the floor. Deuce McBride has his hands on Tyrese the whole way up the floor. Like I have told everybody from the get go after game two, I was like, I'm not going to be a ref analyst. Like I told people on my podcast, like I'm not going to be here auditing every call. Like there was things after game one that the Pacers could have done better. Like
You weren't going
not
to
give
audit all 78 calls?
no, I was definitely not. Like, I mean, there was things that the Pacers could have done better in game one. They gave up multiple 94-foot drives to Josh Hart. They gave up an offensive rebound off of his free throw. Like, do I think that there was calls that didn't go in their favor? Sure. There's calls that don't go in people's favor outside of the last 2 minutes of a game as well. And the same thing is in the reverse. I know that Knicks fans said the same thing to me. Like, I don't hear people complaining about calls now in Indiana. I'm like, you're right, because I didn't complain about them in the prior two games either. Like, I can't be a ref analyst. I refuse to do it.
At the end of the day, it comes down to execution. I mean,
Right.
I think and this is where I could understand in some games where if the refs are dictating the last 2 minutes and just not letting it play out, I rather that you let it play out than call a tight game. But at the end of the day, if you're just getting, out executed and no one's blowing a whistle or anything of that nature, then you just got to execute. Like that's how I look at
And
it.
let's be honest, these last two games, the
There's
officiating
nothing.
certainly didn't call a 40-point deficit, and it didn't cause a 30-point deficit
No,
for the
it didn't.
Pacers in
So
game five either.
so thankfully there was a little reprieve of just not having to hear about the officials in the last two games. But before I let you go, Caitlin, and we wrap up here, who outside of Siakam and Halliburton do you need to step up for this team? Because for me, I've always said we needed McBride to get in here. McBride has done that. CP's guy, and look, I have to, I was giving him a lot of ish during the regular season for Alec Burks not doing anything, but now Alec Burks decides to get back on the scene and remembered how to play some basketball. And so shout out to Burks for doing the damn thing, especially these last three games. When Boyan has gone down, we need somebody who can score in isolation. He's been doing that. So Burks, pleasant surprise. McBride having a good one, especially being that starting rotation. Who on the Pacers side are you looking for?
I mean, at the risk of it sounding like a cop out and just naming starters, they need more from Miles Turner and Aaron Neesmith than what they got in game five.
Hmm.
Certainly, like when TJ and Obi are clicking, that's a boon. But if they lose game six, it's not going to be because of TJ McConnell and Obi Toppin. It's going to be because of what the starters did or didn't do. Miles Turner obviously needs to have a better performance on the glass and against Isaiah Hartenstein than what he just did in game five. And also from the get-go, like he wasn't very effective as a rim protector. There was some very strange possessions in the first quarter where he didn't have contests. There were a few where he had contests and his teammates didn't collect the rebound, but his rim protection to me was a little bit off from the get-go of that game. And then also just Aaron, like I don't think anybody should be held responsible for guarding and stopping Jalen Brunson as a stopper. But something that's been a source of frustration or something that I've been pointing out with it, especially after that particular game, is when you watch the Knicks, they're not just letting Tyrese Halliburton get to his right hand. The book on Tyrese is that you want to take away his right because he prefers to step back to his right. He's very floater dependent. So if you weak him to his left, you automatically have a strong hand contest on the floater. They're weakening him to his left. They're top blocking him. When Tyrese does get to those spots, it's because they've had to change screening angles. He's had to do work to get to those spots on the floor. The Pacers are making it very easy for Jalen Brunson to get to his left hand. And some of that's because Jalen Brunson can be a wizard maintaining a live dribble in the middle of the court. But also, once he gets to the left side of the floor, I would like to see them be a lot more committed with their off-ball stunts to fully close the door on him. And if that leads to catch and shoot threes from Deuce McBride or it leads to catch and shoot threes from Josh Hart, I think you should be a lot more content if you lose game six because they shot you out of the game than continuing to let Jalen Brunson get to his sweet spots on the floor, especially with his dominant hand. So that's something that Aaron, a few times I felt in that game, needed to be better guiding him to the right and guiding him into the help on the right where Obi Toppin, a few times was stationed high, like I'm up here ready to receive him. And Jalen used very hard crossovers to get back to his left hand. So easier said than done, but they need better performances, particularly defensively from both of those guys.
Alan, thank you so much for joining me tonight and previewing game 6 between the Knicks and the Pacers. Please let the listeners know where they could find you and if you got any upcoming work we should be on the lookout for.
Right. So my Twitter handle, X handle at C2_Cooper. The link to my Patreon is there, patreon.com/basketball she wrote. And then on the off days, depending upon if the Pacers do force a game 7, my co-host Samson Folk, his handle's at Sam Folk with 2Ks at the end. He and I are co-hosting shows on YouTube similar to this where we're breaking down film and talking about the games. If people want to catch those aren't paywalled behind the Patreon. We're also having some work that isn't paywalled. If you just head to the Patreon and read it, that you don't have to, you can sign up as a free member. And then also, like, I just want to take the opportunity to say to any of the Knick fans that said nice things here, I've had very good interactions with Knick fans on Twitter. I think that this has been a pretty cool series between both teams, and to everybody that's watched or read any of my work and listened to us here tonight, thanks for doing that.
Once again, shout out to Caitlin Cooper for coming through and helping me preview game 6 between the Knicks and the Indiana Pacers. Make sure to give her a follow and check out her work. Obviously, as you guys just witnessed, she can break down the game like no other. So make sure to check out her work and give her that support. And thank you to Knicks Nation for tapping in today and catching the preview for game 6 between the Knicks and Indiana Pacers. Shout out to all the franchise channel members. We got above the rim in here. Shout out to you, my guy. TM Chief Modern Operation. What up? We got Rico World Peace. Shout out to you as well. Who else we got in here in the chat? We got Will Rose. We got Isaac Blancafor. Shout out to you. Shout out to you as well. We got the regulars, John Talento in here. Who else do we got? We got Son from Brooklyn. Shout out to you. Jam Sessions. Who else? Who else? We got a lot of you in here. Appreciate all you for tapping in for another game of the week preview. And you already know what to do. Make sure to hit that thumbs up button for the squad. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Make sure to support our sponsor, UnderDog Fantasy. Use that promo code KFTV to get up to $250 on your first deposit. Also, we got Watch Party back at Slate for tomorrow. Make sure to go get your tickets if you haven't already done so. And make sure just to head out there, all right? You can go to hang out with the rest of the Orange and Blue Nation as we root for the Knicks as they take on the Indiana Pacers tomorrow. So make sure to go to Slate and make sure to tap in with everybody. And of course, if you haven't catched it already, make sure to go watch CP Ether Draymond Green. This man decided not to come through. He's been talking a lot of nonsense about the Knicks, but given all of his, crazy whatever agendas that he wants to push out there, he didn't want to catch the smoke with CP today. So make sure to go check out that 20-minute monologue of the ether that CP gave Draymond. And hey, after that, Draymond just joins Keith Pompey in the list of not welcome here at KFTV. So, salute to Knicks Nation once again. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll catch you tomorrow for play-by-play and post-game. We out.